Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar on using the ColorChecker Passport. And we're going to talk about the wonderful things that having custom camera profiles can do for your color workflow and just for your color in general. So we got a lot to talk about today, so let's get started. Today's webinar is sponsored by X-Rite. X-Rite is the manufacturer of the ColorChecker Passport, which is what we're going to talk about, along with a lot of other cool stuff for doing profiling and basically color workflow in general. And once I found myself putting a color workflow into place, it has saved me a lot of time and money and headaches. And for those of you that are new to this or haven't joined me before, my name is Joe Brady. I'm your host for today. I'm the webinar manager at the Mac Group in Elmsford, New York. And in addition to that, I also own a portrait and wedding studio with my wife Diane, and I am also a landscape photographer. And I use this stuff in my everyday work. I wanted you to know that. When we send our stuff out to a lab, where there's a handful of labs we use, we have books done, we have posters done, we have canvases done. With a color workflow in place, we consistently get back stuff that looks just like we saw it on the screen, and that's really the goal. But today we're going to talk about just a piece of that. We're going to talk about kind of the capture end and color, and specifically camera profiling. And just before we get into that, let me just let you know for upcoming stuff. This is the X-Rite Photo new homepage, and if you go under the Learning tab, as you see there, you'll see a thing for webinars. And something that is often hidden from folks, if you click on there, down on this first sentence, you'll see in orange text. So let me back up there. You'll see in orange text there, this link says Webinar Archive. If you want to watch a webinar that has already been presented, maybe you missed it, or maybe there's some topics you're interested in that you haven't seen, click on that, and that takes you to this page, which has a listing, and it's more extensive than this, has a listing of all the webinars that are already recorded that you can watch. You can zoom to the parts that interest you, etc., or share them. And as I mentioned, we're here to talk about the ColorChecker Passport, and how we're going to do things is, first I'm going to talk a little bit about the piece itself and what it does and why. Then we're going to go into Adobe Lightroom, and we're going to create a custom camera profile there and apply it to images. And then after we're done with Lightroom, we're going to go in Photoshop and do it there, so that we have both workflows kind of covered. They can mix together, but not everybody has both applications, so that's why we're going to do it that way. Now, just to start off, what is a camera profile? Well, there's different profiles kind of all over the place. And part of it is making sure, first of all, before you do any of this, that your monitor has been profiled and calibrated. So you got to have some hardware to do that. We're not going to talk about that today. In fact, I'm doing a new webinar probably next week on 2 new devices X-Rite just came out with that do just that. So if you're not doing that yet, you might want to tune in. A camera profile is what's called an input profile. And what it does is, basically a profile is a way to translate color from one place to another. So when your camera captures red, well, what does that mean? It might mean something different to the camera manufacturer than it does for Photoshop or Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw or wherever it's going to go. So a profile is where you've got sort of a set of standards. You've got your colors matched to some sort of known set of standards, so that when you bring color from one place to another, they match. That's really the goal. And what the ColorChecker Passport allows you to do is, well, there's 3 targets that allow you to do 3 things. One, it gives you the equipment to create the custom camera profile. There's a white balance target for doing either in-camera white balance or post in software. And there's an enhancement target that allows you to warm or cool your images to exactly the same spot each time. So what that allows you to do is to really get all the color back in the scene to a standard so that they're all going to match. So what that means is, say imagine you're shooting a wedding and you've got 2 or 3 different shooters, and they're shooting different models of camera or maybe even different brands. If they each have a profile, when you process the files, they're all going to match. So that's what we're after. Also, I'll talk about custom white balance and the enhancement targets. All right, so now let's take actually a look at the targets. And again, if any of you have joined late, you should just be seeing my PowerPoint stuff going on right now. If for some reason you're not seeing my screen, which should be the ColorChecker Classic target right now. You may want to exit and come on back in because everybody else is seeing that. And I see Suzette Allen has just joined us. Hi, Suzette. Hopefully you can see everything soon. So just exit and come on back in. So the ColorChecker Classic, you've probably seen this before. It's the same. It's a smaller version of the original Graytag Macbeth ColorChecker, which is now X-Rite. There's also smaller versions. And by the way, to answer this question up front, if you own one of those other targets, you can use it to create profiles. And I'll show you where you can download the software. This target allows you to create that profile because you've got more than just a white balance. You do have a neutral row here, this white to black row. But if you take a look on the target, you can see, I jumped ahead, sorry. You can see we've actually got RGB and CMYK right here. And then these last two rows are kind of colors that mimic things you'll run into in the real world. They're skin tones, nature tones, flowers, plants kind of thing. And by having all of these colors available, as a reference, that's what the profile is built on, so that all your cameras now have some kind of standard on which to base their colors, and that's how it allows them to match their response. Now the next target is a white balance target. Now I do custom white balance frequently when the situation permits it. For example, if I'm shooting a wedding, I don't bother custom white balance. I'll pick a preset. But if I'm doing studio work, if I'm doing studio photography, portraits, or if I'm doing landscape work, I will do a custom white balance because if I have a custom white balance, I have the exact number of whatever the color temperature is. Now, sometimes it's not possible because the light's changing constantly, or you're running in and outside, you've got sunlight, you've got tungsten, you've got fluorescent. So what I'll do is just occasionally I'll flip up the target and take a shot of it under each light, so that I have a reference that I can use for white balancing later. And then the last target is what's called an enhancement target. And what the enhancement target does, sorry about that. What the enhancement target allows you to do is a couple of things. I didn't want to go into the ColorMonkey software. Sorry about that. What the enhancement target does is a couple of things. This row here is called a hue, saturation, and luminance row. Basically, it's a rainbow, and it's there mostly as a reference. On the other side, we've got a black to white wedge here, a gray wedge. And what this is handy is if you take a shot of the target and you have your highlight warnings turned on, if you start to see some of these patches starting to flash, then you know your exposure might be a little off. But the real power in this target are these two middle rows right here. We'll see this a little closer when we go into Lightroom. Let's take a look at them first. Now, on these two rows, the top one is designed for portraits and the bottom one is designed for landscapes. I'm not sure how well you're seeing it on your screen because I'm not sure if you actually have a calibrated monitor, but you might notice that this target here, this patch here, is neutral. And as you move across, they get slightly more, a little bit bluish, a little bit cyanish. If you white balance off of something that is slightly cooler, it's going to warm the image, has the opposite effect. Conversely, down bottom, in the second row, the middle patch is neutral. As you go off to the left, they get a little bit pink. If you click on those, they get a little, yes. They will cool the image. If you go off to the right, they'll warm the image. So if we apply the middle patch to the portrait, you see it ends up having the effect of warming the image. And if we white balance off the cooling patch to the left, it has the effect of making the blues and the greens go a little more intense. And we'll see that better in software when we get there. And Joe asked, can you use these neutral patches to white balance? And the answer is actually yes, you can. If you don't have the white balance patch or white balance target around, you certainly can use those as well. Now let's go through the process. First of all, you got to make sure your exposure is correct. I'm personally a huge fan of handheld meters. In fact, I rarely use my in-camera meter for pretty much anything. I will use it for certain things as a check, but I'm a big fan of handheld meters because they give me the exact reading. You don't have to do that. That's just my way of doing things. First, I will do a custom white balance if it's appropriate. And how you do that is going to be different on each camera. On my Canons, you don't have to fill the frame. All you have to do is fill that center focusing circle. That's all you need to do white balance. You just take a picture of the target and then tell it that's what you want to use for white balance. I believe on Nikon it's the other way around, where you say I want a custom white balance and then it says take the picture. That's a read the manual thing. Then after that, I'll take a photo of the ColorChecker Passport. And it does not, again, have to fill the frame. That's kind of plenty of the frame. I have some shots that are a little bit bigger. But when I'm shooting portraits, I'll typically ask the model to hold it. If I'm shooting landscapes, I typically will just hold it up at arm's length and take a picture of it, which I'll show you in a little bit. So as I mentioned, the process we're going to use today is I'm going to start in Lightroom, and we'll go over how you deal with profiles there. And then we'll go into Photoshop. So let's start by going live into Lightroom. Now, I happen to be on a Mac. You may have noticed this, but it doesn't matter. It looks exactly the same as on a Mac as on a PC. Now, all this stuff is the same. Now, good question just came up. Let's see. I just bring this up. Thomas asks, yes, before this, I'm sorry. For those of you folks who are Aperture users, I'm really sorry to say that you can't apply custom profiles in Aperture using the Passport. The software works on a DNG model, which is what the Adobe Creative Suite uses behind the scenes. Aperture does not do that, nor does Capture One. So if you are processing with your raw files in those softwares, you're not going to be able to use the custom profiles. You can do the enhancement, target, and the white balancing, but not the profiles. Right now, at this point, the profiles can only be used in the Adobe Suite. So Lightroom, Photoshop, but that does include elements and anything using Adobe Camera Raw like Bridge or Illustrator. Okay, so let's go through the profiling process. So I've got a shot here, I'm just holding it out at the end of my fingers, and I took a picture of the target. Now, and another good question, Steve. All right, let's get this under control right now. Steve asked, do you have to shoot in DNG, and doesn't it work with Canon RAW files? There's only one time I'm ever going to bring up the DNG word, and that's when we're in Adobe Camera Raw. I'll show you where it applies. You might notice that all of my images, as I scroll through, you see this is an NEF file. That's a Nikon RAW. If I come over to the other side here, you'll see there's a CR2. That's a Canon RAW. I do not do any DNG conversions. I leave everything in the RAW files. So yes, you don't have to do any conversions. So it works just perfectly fine on the raw files, as you'll soon see. In fact, what I'll do is I'll do one first in Nikon, and then I'll do one in Canon. Not that it looks any different. But here's the process. It's very simple. Simply take a picture of the target. Then you go up to File, Export with Preset, and you'll see ColorChecker Passport there, of course, once you've installed the software that comes with the unit. And then you give it a name. And I'll just call it Nikon Garden. This was actually shot with Nikon D3. And the profiles are tied to the camera. So if I create one for a Nikon D3 and I also have a Nikon D700, the profiles are not going to apply to each. You have to have a profile for each camera you're shooting. So what it does is it goes through its process and it'll just generate the profile. Now Lightroom, the way it works is it doesn't constantly update. So if you create a profile, you have to restart Lightroom for it to see it. Now, Roger asked a question, does it need to be in focus? Not absolutely completely tack sharp, but it needs to be in focus enough to see the grid. Okay, so you can see it says Lightroom has to be restarted to activate the profile. However, like I always like to say, like any good cooking show, I had one in the oven for you. I won't restart Lightroom. It's already here waiting for us. Now, you notice I did not white balance first. No need, because the software knows once it finds the target, and it does one of the ways it does look at the grid and it finds where things are. It knows which of these patches are neutral, so it will do a white balance kind of behind the scenes for its own needs. So you do not have to white balance first. However, when you're doing your image editing, you have to both white balance and apply the profile. Let's go through that process. And the order actually doesn't matter, but I'll white balance first because it's simple. So I'll just bring up the white picker. I just hit the letter W. And if I hadn't, I screwed this image up a little bit ahead of time purposely. I white balanced off of some of these flowers off in the background, which obviously were not going to be pure white. Then I came over and I like to white balance off of this second patch in. This one is pure white, and yes, you can use it. But if your exposure is a little off where you're a little bit hot, you might lose a channel. So I like to come in one because that's always got good data. So I will click on there for my white balance. So again, you can see that's a true white balance for the day. All of a sudden it got lots sunnier out. And the actual profile is in the develop module, and as I scroll down, it's under camera calibration right here. Now if I click on profile, you'll see not only the profiles but also the camera modes that Nikon provides. In this case, Adobe standard is the default. It's very safe, it's accurate, it's neutral, it's boring actually. It's very safe, but it's actually causing to me a little desaturation in some of the colors. What's ended up happening is for some reason it seems to lose a lot of the blues. And if any of you own a ColorChecker or any of these, you'll notice in particular that these blue patches in the Adobe standard conversion get a lot lighter than they look to your eye, which I don't like, and it causes a big change in skies in particular. Also, these pink and purple patches have a tendency to go off, and greens go off as well. Reds and yellows are pretty good. They don't seem to move much. But take a look at this target when we add the profile. Now this was a Nikon D3 and I shot it in a garden, so I called my profile appropriately Nikon 3 Garden. Here it is. Watch the target when I apply the profile. Look at the enormous change in the colors we just saw. Let me go back to the Adobe standard. You can see an enormous change in these blues, the greens, and also in the background you can see the flowers have changed color a lot. This is what the scene looked like, not what we saw before. The beauty is, I now have a white balance, I've got my custom profile, I got all my color back, I can now select all the images from that shoot. In this case I just have this handful here. Click on synchronize. I'll choose white balance and calibration, which is another name for the profile. Click on synchronize, and basically at that point my color editing is done. It's really that simple to do. In fact, let's jump over to one of these other images. Now we see I've got all the deep color. Now purple is a very difficult color to photograph for some reason. Cameras seem to have fits with it. Also, the greens seem to lose a little bit of life. Watch what happens if I turn off the profile back to the standard. And look how much color it's lost. Look how lifeless it's gotten. By applying the profile, we get all that color back. And it's that simple. Now, occasionally you can have a bad exposure, or something was wrong with your lighting, or maybe it wasn't lit evenly. Maybe like if you had two different light sources and part of the color checker was lit by one and one by the other. That could possibly create a screwy profile. And what Andy asks is, how do you get rid of profiles you don't like? And Andy, I'll tell you, stay tuned. Okay, so another question is, how many profiles do you need to have? Well, I'm a little pickier than most, and this is a personal preference kind of thing. But I like to have a profile for each light source. So let me bring up another, let's bring up a portrait. I like to have a profile. Here's how I create profiles. I create one for daylight. Now, I don't create a profile for every lens. There are people that take it to that extreme. I haven't found enough of a difference to bother. I will have one for my daylight. I'll have one for my flashes. So Craig just asked, what do you have to do if you have a Canon 580 EX2? Create a profile with it. I actually, again, just put it in the scene and take a picture with the flash, and create the profile from that. So I'll create a profile for my speed lights. I'll create a profile for my studio lights. And the reason I'll do that is because we're going after different light spectrum or spectra, not color temperature. That's white balance. That's different. The profile is going to be different if the spectrum of the light changes. So I may do one if it's cloudy out. I'll do one for fluorescent and tungsten if I encounter that. I'll also do one if I enter some kind of really weird mixed lighting situation. Like I did a gymnastics meet, and it had sodium vapor lights and tungsten lights alternating. It had this really weird orange creamsicle color that a standard white balance just was causing all the uniforms from the girls to just go a strange color. A profile fixed that. So again, just through the process real quick. File, export with preset, ColorChecker Passport. This is a Fuji S5. I won't actually go through the process because I already have this one. And that's it. Click on save and it's done. Now, in this one, is our friend Hazel. I thought this wall was neutral. So if I click on that to white balance, I thought, all right, well, that's fine. But in reality, it was not. So I'll come back into this target and watch the white balance change. All right, you see it got a little warmer. Let's go down to the profile. Now, I do remember this dress, and it was a kind of it was a green that was very difficult, kind of a hard to describe it. It was kind of like a bright olive green, but it lost its greenness, for lack of a better word, on the standard profile. Well, when I applied the custom profile, which is right here, watch what happens to the dress. Look at the amazing difference. All the color came back. Now it's green again, where with the standard conversion, it was almost kind of more of a beige bronzy color. So again, doing that got me my colors back. Now, a couple other questions. Oren's asking about profiles in Bridge. Stay tuned. We go into Photoshop. We'll talk about that. Greg and a couple other people asked about polarizers. Can a polarizer change? Yes, it can. So if I'm out shooting landscape stuff and I'm going to put a polarizer on my camera, which I frequently do the same thing. I take a shot of the Passport with my polarizer. So as far as adjusting colors, let me make this clear. If you notice, I didn't do any color adjustments. All I did was apply the profile. That adjusts the colors for you automatically. If you want to then do further color editing, by all means, go right ahead. You might want to change things. But white balance and apply your profile before you do any color editing, because that's going to change it, okay? All right, let's see. Now, just understand that the profile is a camera input profile. It's for the specific camera. So I've got my one scene here. I'll take all the images during this shoot. Again, click on Synchronize, choose White Balance and Calibration, click Sync, and it applies the profile and the white balance to all of the images from the shoot. I can take a look at another one, and you can see the color for each of these has come back. It's really a dramatic difference, and it is so simple. So as far as Thomas, hold on. Thomas wants to know how to remove profiles and delete profiles. I'll show you that. Now remember, we're in Lightroom. Lightroom is kind of two things. It's three things. It's an image database, it's an image editing program, and it's kind of like a giant Adobe RAW converter, all in one. And so all the edits we've done, including adding the profiles, haven't actually been applied to the image. These are just kind of promises to what will happen to the image once we actually export it. I could turn these profiles off or change things at any point. Because remember, we're dealing with raw files, and they don't actually have the profile applied until we export them. Let me just show you, for you landscape nature shooters, I'll just show you a couple of quick examples. I mentioned blue skies seem to have a dramatic change. This is a fairly uninteresting image. I actually have another image I put a new sky in, but I want you to see what happens by applying the profile. Watch what happens to the color of the sky. It's an amazing difference. Same thing with this spoonbill here. The sky was much warmer and deeper. Let it finish loading, and watch what happens to the color of the sky when I apply the profile. You can see all the color. It's sometimes subtle, sometimes it's dramatic. All right, so Eric asks, what percentage of the image does a color checker need to fill? That's a good question. If possible, I will do it this big. If I'm shooting a portrait with a model, I will do it that big. Not always practical for whatever reason. I'll show you the smallest I've gotten away with. Actually, this one worked just fine. It was able to create a profile from that, as did this one. That's pushing it. That's getting a little small. Typically, I like to just hold it at an arm's length. And in fact, when we go into Adobe Camera Raw, I'll show you where I did that. Now, one of the things that having a profile will do is it will fix if your camera has a bias. And I'm sure some of you guys might be as old as me, and you shot film in the past. Well, we all remember that when we did shoot film, film had its own bias. It was warmer, it was more intense in certain colors, etc. Cameras are the same way. Every camera's got a different bias to it. Now this is a 7D, Canon 7D. I found that my 7D, and I don't know if this is for all of them, my 7D has a little bit extra strength in magenta for some reason, and it has a tendency to make skin tones a little redder than I like. So really the answer is I have to have a profile for my 7D, which I do. Take a look at my friend Susan here and watch the skin, which has gone a little bit too red-brown for me. When I apply the profile, it neutralizes that out and adds kind of, seems to be a little bit more yellow, which is more accurate to her skin tone. See, that's a little too red. Again, that fixes it, and once again I can select the rest of the images in the shoot, click on sync, and I'm not going to white balance because one of these was an outside shot, but I'm going to apply the profile, and all my images now have the correct skin tone. It's a beautiful thing. Now Greg asked, can you photograph the target upside down? Yep, you can photograph it at any angle you want. It really doesn't matter. The software will figure it out. I have done that as a test, by the way, so yes. Excuse me. Let's see. All right, so let's move on. I think I've covered everything in Lightroom here. Let's take a look and see how things work in Photoshop. And by the way, I appreciate all your questions. Keep them coming. Some of your questions will be getting answered in Photoshop. Let me just quit out of Lightroom for now so I can save up some memory here. Let me hide the other stuff, and let's open up a couple of raw files in Photoshop. And I'm going to do landscape again because this applies to target size, etc. So I'm going to open these two, and while it's opening in Adobe Camera Raw, let's see, let me just take a look here. Okay, so let's see, just answered that. Oh, here's a good question. Candace asks, she said she shoots a lot of flowers in daylight. Can you install the software and go back, apply a profile for older images? Absolutely. I did this with some images I shot about 5 years ago. I still had the camera, so I created a profile for it, and the color reproduction improvement was amazing. So it was a beautiful thing. All right, so, and again, Patrick asked, will I still hold the color checker at arm's length if the object I'm going to photograph is 12 or 15 or 20 feet away? The answer to that is yes, as long as it's under the same light that I'm holding it out underneath with my arm. When I'm doing a landscape, typically here, this is what I'll do. I'll hold it at arm's length because, well, it's being illuminated by the sun. And the sun's, what, 93 million miles away? So a couple feet here and there, or a couple miles, either hair isn't going to really make a difference. So again, here's my target. How do you create a profile when you're dealing with Adobe Camera Raw? Okay, here's where I have to mention the dreaded word DNG. This is the only time the word DNG is going to come up. If you're using Adobe Camera Raw, there's no kind of plugin system here. So the way this software works is this is the one time I have to save an image as a DNG file. And it's very simple to do. Bring up the image with your target, click on Save Image. I did one Teton test earlier. I'll call this Teton Test 2. The default extension actually is DNG, and I have a folder with my exported DNG files. So I click on Save. That's it. That's as complicated as it is, and that's the only file I ever have to convert to a DNG. Now, Jim brings up a good point about using profiles in Lightroom and in Photoshop. They all use the same profile. So if I create a profile in Lightroom, Photoshop and Adobe Camera Raw automatically see it. And vice versa. When I create a profile here, Lightroom will see it. All right, so I've saved my DNG file. I also have to use a different application that comes with the Passport called ColorChecker Passport. So this is a little standalone application that creates profiles outside of the software. And if you're just a Photoshop user, this is what you use. So I open this software and I just add an image. So let's go get my DNG file. And how do I call it? Teton Test 2, I think. Here it is. Here's the one we just saved. So I click on Open, and that will open the image in here. And fire it up. Now, on your cameras, just to be clear, the profiles do not live in your cameras. They all get processed in software. The custom white balance lives in your camera. But again, we're dealing with raw files. So remember, in a raw file, you're kind of assigning things, but nothing has actually been applied to the file. And that will not happen until you actually export the file. All right, so just want to be clear. Now, if you're not sure where the custom profile thing lives on your camera, it doesn't. Now, cameras do have things called profiles. They're picture profiles that Canon and Nikon are both big on this. I'm not familiar with other brands. But they have these portrait and landscape and blah blah, all these different color profiles they call. they're not custom profiles, they're kind of looks, and they're very subjective. And if you want to take control of the color and make sure you get the results you want, my recommendation is to stay on the neutral and not bother with those. And as long as you're shooting raw, those settings are not built into the file. Okay. So it sees, here's the target. It found the target. And again, if I zoom out, you can see this is the image with just me holding it out at arm's length. As I zoom out there, I'll zoom back in. So it found the target, and I simply click on Create Profile. And I'll call this just like we called the other one. Let's see, Teton Test 2 is the name of the profile now. Click on Save, and the software generates the profile. Now, Donald asked, why am I adverse to converting from DNG from NEF? I'm not really. There are some advantages to doing that. The simple reason that I do not convert any of my raw files into DNGs when coming into Lightroom is I shoot lots of different cameras. I shoot Nikons, I shoot Canons, I shoot Fujis, and I shoot medium format. And they all have different extensions. And it's just something for me, it allows me to quickly see without going to dig down which camera shot the file. All right, so you see it says the profile has been created and applications using this profile may need to be restarted. They're talking about Lightroom. Adobe Camera Raw will see this right away. So I can actually quit here, and just like we saw, let me go full screen here, just like we saw in Lightroom, let me zoom back out, just like we saw in Lightroom, all the options, all the calibration stuff, all of that stuff exists here in Adobe Camera Raw. It's just kind of hidden in different places. And camera calibration is right here, this little picture of a camera. Click on it and you see, okay, here's our profiles. Now there is no Adobe standard for medium format backs. That's what this is shot on. But it uses an Adobe Camera Raw. Here's the one we just created. See, Teton Test 2. So let's apply that. And you just saw the colors shift. Let's go back again. Here's where we started. Here's our, we got the intensity back. I will re-white balance off of this target to neutralize. And you can see we've got much better color already. Then I simply selected all the images in my shoot. I just have one open. And when I click on Synchronize, you'll see a dialog box that, other than oriented vertically, is the same set of options we had when we were in Lightroom. White balance, camera calibration, click OK, and it applies it to the other image. And there's my landscape shot with the color taken care of. Now, Rob asked a good question, because and again, this is something that applies to me. If you're shooting in shade and what you're going to then photograph is in the sun, what are you going to do? Good question. Typically, well, if I'm shooting, say, rising sun, he specifically mentioned sunrise. If you're shooting sunrise or sunset, here's what I recommend you do. Just take your shots in RAW. Leave the white balance on whatever happens to be appropriate, whether it be daylight or shade or what have you. I create my profiles for my sunrises and sunsets typically in the middle of the day because I don't want to neutralize out that golden light. So I will create a daylight profile midday. I'll take a picture of the target to create the profile. I'll capture the white balance also, and I will apply that to my sunrise and sunset shoots. What that does is it gives me the colors back because I still have the reference of all the red, greens, and blues, etc. But it maintains that golden glow of that beautiful light. So that is my way of doing that, and it does seem to work pretty well. So I don't necessarily create a profile for every lighting condition. Once I have one daylight profile, I will pretty much stick with it. The one exception is if I'm traveling to somewhere that has very different atmospheric conditions. I live on the East Coast, which is a lot more humid than, say, the desert Southwest, which is a favorite spot of mine to shoot. There's more water in the air here, and what the effect that has is it diminishes the blues in the sky a little bit and sometimes a lot. If you've ever traveled to the desert Southwest or you live out there, and you compare it to the east, you'll notice the blues almost look unnatural. They're so extra blue, you can't believe how blue it is compared to what we're used to in the east. And that's because of that lack of water in the air. I do have a profile for desert conditions because it's letting some more blue through, and that's changing the spectrum of the light a little bit. It's a little bit of a fussy thing. It's a very minor change when you apply each profile, but there is a difference. And you see, It takes 30 seconds to create a profile, so why not? Okay, so as long as we're here, somebody asked about managing your profiles. What if you've got too many of them, or you don't like them, or you want to share them? Well, when you buy a Passport, you also can download this software utility from X-Rite called DNG Profile Manager. And what this allows you to do is lets you see all the profiles in your system, and you can sort them by name, or I'll sort them by camera. And you can see here, like for example, I've got 5 different ones for the 5D. Now this test one, I don't remember why I did that, probably just as a test. So if I decide I don't want that, I can just hit the delete key and get rid of it. Conversely, I did a workshop out in Arizona with the 5D, and maybe there's some folks that also had 5Ds that want to process their files, or maybe I'm giving my images to someone to print, or to someone who's going to edit them for a magazine, and I want to give them the profile. I can also go to File, Export the Profile, and I can send them out to a folder to give to someone that they can then use in Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw to apply. Now, another good question John asks about mixed lighting for a profile. Mixed lighting is tough, say for example we're in a wedding, sometimes we'll have tungsten and flash and fluorescent all in one. So what are you going to do about that? All right, good question. Couple things you can do. Well, first of all, if there's a portrait, if there's a person involved, they're the only person I'm really concerned about. If I've got mixed lighting to deal with, I'm dealing with flash and tungsten. What I will frequently do is I will actually gel my flash to try to have it match the tungsten a little bit and get things a little more in line. If that's not possible, let me quit this. Oh, and by the way, all of these softwares live on xritephoto.com. So you can go on xritephoto.com, go under products. Actually, let me see if I can get online here. I can actually just show you where it is. Sure, why not? Let's go to X-Rite Photo. Hold on here. Let's go on to xritephoto.com. I'll show you where everything lives. So you go under products. Here's ColorChecker Passport under ColorChecker Targets. And let that run down. And you'll see support down here, this tab. As soon as my spinning beach ball catches up, let me just check questions while that's loading. Okay, so you see software downloads, 3 items. And I can scroll down here, and you'll see the latest version of the software and the plugin for Lightroom. And then also up here, you'll see the Passport now includes the DNG Profile Manager, and that's something you get a link to if you actually purchase the Passport. But if you already own a color checker from some other, either a mini color checker or a full size, you can download these softwares and it'll work. The only thing you'll be missing is the enhancement target, but you can create profiles with your older stuff. So I just wanted to show you that. One last question before we continue on. Here's a good question. Greg asks, if you've assigned a profile to a photo and then rename it, what happens to the photo? Good question. My guess is that the link would be broken and you'd have to reapply it. If I go into my camera calibration, that's a good question. If you actually delete a profile, which I guess would be the same as if you rename it, it would no longer show up in your list. So you would have to reapply it. Now remember, these are raw files, so none of this profile information has actually been applied to the file until we export it. So once I click on Open Image, then the profile will be built into the file. All right, you only get to apply the profiles to your raw files. And Joe asks, where are the profiles stored? Well, it's different on every operating system. Again, on xritephoto.com, they have a listing for the various Windows OSs and on the Mac where they live. I can tell you on the Mac, but it's not really important. If you want to know, just go ahead and take a look. And to export the files, again, just if you have the DNG Profile Manager, just click on Export. It'll put them in any folder of your choice. And just as a tease to show you, I've got my profile applied here. This was shot with a 28 megapixel digital back. So I'm going to, if you haven't seen one of these before, these are really wonderful to shoot with. And as I zoom into 100% and scroll over, you get to see the detail that 28 megapixel digital back brings you. It's kind of amazing. Just consider yourself warned if you ever shoot one of these. It's hard to go back once you see the files and you print them really big. It's amazing. Okay, so that's it. That's how profiles work in Adobe Camera Raw. Now, any software that, whoops, what did I just do? I obviously clicked on something wrong. Any software that uses Adobe Camera Raw, that means Elements, anything you're dealing with Bridge, Illustrator, InDesign, any softwares that will use Adobe Camera Raw, you can use the profiles there. Okay. I keep hitting white, I see what I did. I keep clicking on various pictures, parts of the image for white balancing. So let me just hit done here. And let's jump back into PowerPoint and cover a couple more things. All right, so as I mentioned, if you ask if you're a Photoshop Elements user, yes, this all still works. Now, once you export the file as a PSD, as a TIFF, as a JPEG, all of the data that we've just done gets built into the file. Right, so that once it's no longer a raw file, all of that color is built in. Now, sorry, Rachel, good question. Let me finish about shooting in mixed light. If you're in mixed lighting, if the mixed lights are all illuminating the subject at the same time, I will create a profile for it. As I mentioned when I had that weird mix in the gymnasium, the combination of tungsten and sodium vapor, I positioned the target so that both of those light sources were hitting it and created a profile for that. If I'm dealing with a wedding situation, though, what I will do is I will take a shot of the ColorChecker Passport right next to the bride. Because we all know in a wedding there's only one person that matters, right, ladies? It's the bride. The grooms are there just as a necessary evil. So I will take a ColorChecker Passport shot with it near the bride and that light so that I can use it. And I'll also occasionally just flip up the target and take a white balance so that I have a reference should something change in the light. Okay. And again, just to finish the thought, Connie asks, applying ColorChecker to existing photos that were shot without the ColorChecker. Let me just jump, oh, I already quit Lightroom. Let me jump back into Photoshop a second. Let's say, for example, I open up a shot that I took, I don't know, some other time. Let's just open this one up. All right, so here I have a shot. Let's say I shot this 5 years ago. Well, as long as I still have the camera and I created a profile for the camera, I can go in and apply a profile to it. And here's the standard profile. I click in and I can see that here's an S5 profile. And in this case, it was a subtle difference. Let's go back. I don't know how well you're seeing on your monitors. The green trees are undergoing a little bit of change, and the river's getting a little more intense. In this case, it's a subtle. Actually, I can see it fairly strongly in this area, right kind of on the left side of where the water is falling. And I did go back to images I shot 5 years earlier that I still had the camera. As long as they're raw, remember, they have to be a raw file. But as long as they're a raw file, you can always go back and apply a profile to them. All right. Oh, and also, yes, good question. Would I change my process to 2010? The answer is yes, as this was an older file, so you could see. 2003 versus 2010, there's some processing differences, and yes. So again, you can see from the Adobe standard, you can see it up in the trees and in this area here as I apply the profile. In this case, it was more of a subtle difference, but it's actually a nice one. So then I would just click Done, and it will carry that data until it's exported. And as far as exporting file, Donald asked what's the best exporting for longevity. And for me, is to keep the original file. That's what I do. You could save them as DNGs as well, but I prefer to keep my original raw files somewhere. All right, so we've done Photoshop. Well, let's say you're doing all this and you got a bunch of JPEGs. What can you do? Well, the problem with JPEGs is all of the information, the color space, the color profile, color temperature, all that is built into the file, and there's no way to change it. So what can you do? Well, the enhancement target you can use. Actually, I didn't show you the enhancement target. Let me actually put that into action once real quick. Let me go into Lightroom a second and show you how that works. Because enhancement target's kind of cool if you're doing, particularly for portraits. I don't use it as much for landscapes, but I use it for portraits a lot. Also, profiles, another good question Candace asks. Profiles are specific to the camera model. So if you own two D300s or two Canon 7Ds, the profile will work on all of them. Now, here's the caveat. Maybe you don't want them to. Maybe your cameras are acting a little differently. Maybe one has got a little more cyan in it than the other. In Lightroom, you can actually sort your images. I'm not going to go into Lightroom training today, but you can sort your images actually by camera serial number. But you can't apply a profile from a different model of camera. So for example, this is on my 7D. So if I go down to profiles, I only see my 7D profiles, where if I go over to an image that I shot with a 5D, like this one, you see I have a different set of profiles here. So the profiles are tied in to the camera model. Okay, so excuse me. So I have this image here, and I'll apply my profile. Wonderful, but let's say I want to warm it up a little bit. I can go to my enhancement target that I would have shot at the same shoot, and here you can see a little bit better. That's too zoomed in. Let's do 1 to 3. Here you can see a little bit better where I mentioned the white balance. This one is neutral. That should be neutral there. And as you come across, they start to get slightly blue. Now, if I were to white balance off of this blue, it would make it very warm. And again, conversely, this row, this one is neutral. You can see these are getting a little, the targets are getting a little pinker. That will have the opposite effect. That will actually cool the image. And these are getting blue again. That will warm the image. So if I apply this image, and let's say I want to white balance off of this one. Did you see how the image got warmer? Let me zoom out a little bit. So here's neutral. And watch what happens if I'll come way over here. Watch the skin. See how much warmer the skin got? Now if I decide I like that, I can select the other images in the shoot, resync just the white balance this time, click on synchronize, and now I've got a warmer image than I had before. And the beauty of having it on this target is you can get to exactly the same amount of warmth or cooling every time. And that's the beauty of it. All right, I'm just about out of time, so let's finish up some stuff. So again, JPEGs, unfortunately, with JPEGs, all its information is built into the file, so that's really the disadvantage of dealing with JPEGs. You can use the enhancement target that we just saw, though. That will apply to any file. The only thing you cannot do to a JPEG is actually apply a custom camera profile, because that's been built in. Okay. Oh, and one other, Patrick brings up a good question. Patrick says he has a ColorMonkey design. Will the Passport profiles have any conflicts? The ColorMonkey design, ColorMonkey photo, any of the monitor colorimeter calibration systems create monitor and printer profiles. They have nothing to do with camera profiles. All of these things are kind of their own little items that then interact with each other once you're actually processing the file. So what a camera profile does is it takes the data from the camera. It now has a reference of all these colors, so it knows what red, green, blue, and CMYK and a bunch of other colors are, so that it can then translate those colors correctly into another space. Your monitor profile does the same thing. It knows what this red should be, and it corrects for that. And then the printer profiles for the printer. This gets a little bit complicated, and again, it's a subject for another day. So if you guys are really into this, I would ask for you to watch the monitor calibration webinar, which is called Beyond Monitor Calibration, where I go over all that stuff. And I'll be doing some more of that in the future. Okay? So, and the last thing is, custom profile and white balance both go together. When I apply a profile, I still need to white balance it. Because think of the white balance as you're kind of setting the base temperature, and then the profile is, okay, if this is neutral, then I know where to put the red, green, and blue from there. You could apply a profile and have a wrong white balance and get really bizarre results. You have to do both, okay? Just want to be clear on that. So we've seen that white balance by itself is important. You still have to do it, but it's not going to give you all the color back, and it's not going to allow the colors to match from camera to camera and from color temperature to light source. And we've also seen that the standard raw conversions in both the softwares are causing a loss of some color tonality and saturation. Having a custom profile allows us to get that back. So we get back the weakened color. As I mentioned, you can match different cameras, and I'll show you some examples in just a minute. You can also match color under different light sources. So say, for example, you're shooting a wedding party, and the bridesmaids have their typical bizarre color dresses that looks different under different light sources. Maybe it looks clean magenta under sunlight, but when they get under fluorescent or tungsten light, the color of the dress completely changes. If you have a profile for each of those light sources, they'll actually match regardless of the light source. Once I started using this thing in my workflow, I would say it probably cut my color editing time down in Lightroom probably by 70%, because it really is create the profile, apply it to the whole series of images in those lighting conditions, and you're done editing color. So regardless of the light source, as I mentioned, you're going to get consistent results. And if you go on to X-Rite Photo, I did a couple of videos for them with the Passport and with the Color Monkey, and we did a shoot with two different cameras, two different brands of cameras, created profiles for each of them under the same light sources, and got the same results from completely different cameras. They're $99 retail. If you call your favorite retailer, you may get a different price. Look online, give them a call. As a thank you for joining us today, in our email that we'll send out sometime tomorrow, we will also include a coupon with a $10 rebate for the ColorChecker. So again, you guys had a lot of questions. I thank you for that. We're kind of out of time, but you may have some things that are still driving you nuts. So if that's the case, send me an email. You can send me an email, answers@xritephoto.com, and I will do my best to get you an answer, because I know you had a lot of questions. I wasn't able to get them all in, maybe, but send me an email and I'll do my best. So I'm out of time. Thank you all for the great questions. It was a real pleasure spending time with you today. Hope to see you online again soon, and until next time, everybody have a great week. Bye-bye.